My daughter stood in the doorway, her voice sharp. "Get out or I'll call 911. I had come to warn her, to help her, but she slammed the door on everything I'd tried to protect. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I walked away in silence, called the attorney, and set the wheels in motion. They thought I was bluffing. They had no idea I still held part of the deed, and the power to sell the house they were sinking. What happened next wasn't out of spite. It was long overdue justice. I stood on the front porch of my daughter's house, holding a folder in one hand, and the weight of 30 years in the other. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the walkway, but nothing felt heavier than what I was about to do. I hadn't come to fight. I hadn't come to argue. I had come to save Stella from something she couldn't yet see. I rang the doorbell once, and I heard muffled voices behind the door. Her voice laughing. For a brief second, I almost turned around. Almost. But then I remembered the numbers I had read the night before. The second mortgage, the home equity line, the credit reports I had printed in disbelief. The debt Grayson had hidden behind his confident smile and expensive cologne. The house the one I helped her buy was on the line. The door opened. Stella stood there with her phone in hand, her expression caught somewhere between surprise and discomfort. "Mom," she said, eyes narrowing slightly. "This is unexpected." I offered a small smile. "We need to talk." She hesitated, then stepped aside. "I'm on the phone with Madison. One sec." She lifted the phone again. "Hey, I'll call you back. Dad's here." She ended the call without waiting for a response and tucked her phone into her pocket. The living room looked polished and modern, clearly Grayson's influence. A huge television dominated the wall, and his gaming setup sprawled across the coffee table alongside half-finished energy drinks and tangled cords. I remembered when this room was just an idea on a blueprint when I sat with Stella and helped her measure square footage and pick paint colors. She motioned toward the couch. "Want some coffee? I'm about to make some." "This is serious, Stella." She paused by the kitchen doorway. Her smile that practiced one she'd adopted since marrying Grayson faltered just a little. "Okay, but I'm making coffee anyway. My hands need something to do when you sound like that." I followed her into the kitchen. It smelled like lavender candles and stress. There were bills tucked behind the toaster unopened. She avoided looking at them, but I saw them. I didn't waste time. I opened the folder and laid out the papers on the counter. She glanced at them with confusion. "What's this gambling debts?" I said softly. $53,000. Grayson's name is on everyone. He's been using the house as collateral." Her brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" I tapped the documents. "These are statements from online casinos, loan applications, a second mortgage for $30,000, a home equity line for $15,000, withdrawals from your retirement account, all tied to this address. Your home—" Stella stepped back, blinking as if I'd just slapped her. "No, that's not possible. It's all right here." She leaned over and swept the papers off the counter with one angry motion. They scattered across the tile floor. "Grayson would never do that. He loves me. He would never risk our home." "Look at the signatures," I said, kneeling to gather the papers again. "His handwriting, his account numbers. This isn't some mistake, Stella." "You made these up," she snapped, turning away from me. "You've never liked him. You're trying to drive us apart." I paused, crouched with my hand still on the paper. My knees ached, but I didn't move. "I'm trying to protect you. You think I enjoy this?" She turned to face me. Her voice rose, her hands shaking. "You hate that I married him. You always hated him. And now you're trying to poison me against him with fake paperwork and wild accusations." I stood slowly. The kitchen felt too small, too loud. "I co-signed for this house," I reminded her quietly. "I have a legal right to know what's happening with it." "You don't have a right to ruin my life," she shouted. "Get out, Stella! Get out of my house." Her eyes were filled with panic and rage. "Right now," I took a breath, tried to keep my voice calm. "Your house, the one I helped you buy, the one I put my name on to get you the mortgage you needed." She stepped closer, her phone suddenly back in her hand, her fingers white around it. "Get out or I'll call 911 and tell them you're harassing me." The words hung there between us, louder than any scream, and just like that, something inside me went very still. I didn't beg, I didn't cry. Not this time. I looked at my daughter, the little girl who used to sit on my lap and ask me how mortgage interest worked, the teenager. I drove to campus tours, the bride I gave away not so long ago, and I saw a stranger. She didn't see me anymore, not as a mother, not as the woman who sacrificed her youth, her peace, and her savings to make sure Stella never went without. All she saw was an obstacle. So I picked up my papers again, folding them with the same deliberate care I once used on blueprints and balance sheets. My hands didn't tremble. My heart hurt, yes, but my mind was already making plans. She stared at me, confused by my silence, probably expecting anger or tears. Instead, I gave her a small, steady smile. A farewell, maybe? Or a warning. "I hope he's worth it," I said softly, stepping around her. "He is," she called after me. I paused in the doorway, turned one last time. "And I hope the house is too." I let myself out. The sky had darkened. A breeze moved through the trees as I walked to my car, slow and careful. My hands were steady on the steering wheel even as my chest ached. Through the window I saw her watching me go, phone still pressed to her ear. Probably already calling Grayson, telling him that her crazy mother showed up with fake documents and jealousy in her eyes. But that wasn't the story anymore. This wasn't about feelings. This was about facts. The car started on the first try like always. Reliable. Predictable. Everything I'd tried to be. I drove home through familiar streets past old grocery stores and gas stations, and the school where I used to wait in the pickup line. Each place a reminder of how many years I had built around her life. Now I would build something else. At home, I dropped my keys into the wooden bowl Stella had carved in 7th grade. It still sat on the hallway table like a relic from another time. I looked around the house I kept up alone now. Clean, quiet, stable. And suddenly all I wanted was clarity. No more begging to be heard. No more trying to prove my worth as a mother. No more hoping that love would outweigh influence. If they wanted to put their home on the line for a man who couldn't stay off gambling websites, then so be it. But they had forgotten something very important. This wasn't just her house. It was mine too. And now I was going to protect what I'd built. I walked into my office, turned on the lamp, and opened the drawer where I kept my documents. Legal papers, contracts, mortgage records, all filed alphabetized, color-coded like I'd taught myself to do when every dollar counted. I found the folder marked Stella Trump Property. And I smiled. Quietly, tiredly, but with the kind of resolve that comes from knowing you've done everything right, and someone else is about to learn that the hard way. "Let's see what the law has to say," I murmured, and I got to work. The house was quiet when I walked in. Too quiet. I hadn't realized how much I'd grown used to the silence. Years ago, I would have filled it with music, maybe something soft on the radio while I made dinner. Now it just felt like a shell, clean and well-maintained, but hollow in a way that only becomes clear when the people you built it for stop calling it home. I slipped off my shoes, set my purse down on the small hallway bench, and stood for a moment with my eyes closed. I hadn't planned to visit Stella today, but the bank's call, the numbers, the fear. It all pushed me there. And now I was left with her words ringing in my head. "Get out, or I'll call 911. I moved into the kitchen, switched on the coffee maker out of habit, and stared at the cabinets I'd refinished myself the summer after Stella started high school. She wanted white with silver handles, said it felt like a magazine kitchen. I spent hours sanding, painting, installing each one while she scrolled through Pinterest and planned her dream life. And I had done it all gladly. Back then, every call for help was a purpose. Every late-night request or small dream she dared to voice was something I'd try to make real. I carried my coffee into the living room, sat in the recliner that used to belong to my father, and let the memories come. 18-hour workdays, teaching full-time during the day and waitressing at night, skipping vacations for over a decade, that one summer when the water heater broke and the entire family trip budget went straight to the plumber. I'd made peace with sacrifice long ago. I believed in it. I believed that building something for your children stone by stone, dollar by dollar, was the only kind of legacy that mattered. And when Stella got older, graduated college debt-free because I had planned every semester down to the penny, I thought just maybe I had done something right. Then came Grayson. I never trusted him, not because he was loud or flashy, but because he talked too much and said too little. The kind of man who made charm look like currency. Stella was smitten. I said little. I didn't want to lose her, and so when they decided to buy a house, too big, too soon, too ambitious, I held my tongue. When they came to me saying the bank wouldn't approve them for the full loan amount, I didn't question why. Stella sat at my kitchen table that day, hands clasped tight. Her voice soft, rehearsed. "Mom, the mortgage officer says if you co-sign, we'll get approved. It won't be forever. We'll refinance in a couple of years. We just need help getting started." I remember looking at her, that same pleading in her eyes she used when asking for a puppy at age 6. I should have said no, but I thought, she's my daughter. I want her to have a home. I want her to build stability. Maybe Grayson will grow up. Maybe it'll work out. So I signed. I didn't think I was putting my life at risk. I thought I was building hers. Now, sitting in the quiet, I walked down the hall to my home office and opened the file cabinet. It smelled faintly of dust and printer ink. Every drawer was neatly labeled. I hadn't touched the real estate, Stella folder, in years. But there it was. Thick, heavier than I remembered. I pulled it out and placed it on the desk. I didn't rush. I opened it carefully, page by page, tracing the history of the house with my fingertips. Loan applications, credit reports, proof of employment, bank statements. Then finally I found it. The original mortgage application. I recognized my signature before I saw my name. Stella's handwriting. Soft, rounded letters next to mine. So full of hope. And there, just above our names, the section I'd barely registered when we first signed. I hadn't read it closely back then. I was too focused on getting her what she wanted. Now I read every word. Co-applicant. Claire. Relationship to applicant. Mother. Financial responsibility. Joint and several liability. Legal rights. Equal standing in matters of sale refinancing and ownership disputes. I paused, rereading one sentence again and again. In the event of financial distress, default, or dispute regarding property use or disposal, all co-applicants retain equal legal standing to initiate protective measures, including but not limited to foreclosure proceedings, forced sale, or transfer of title. Forced sale. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. My hands didn't shake, but my heart thudded with quiet resolve. They had forgotten this. Grayson in his arrogance, Stella in her denial. They thought I was just the woman who helped them, once the woman they could push aside. But I wasn't just her mother. On paper, I was her co-owner. This house wasn't just theirs, it was mine too. And if it was being used to support lies, to fuel addiction, to risk everything I had helped her build, then I had a right, no, a duty to act. I stood carrying the document to the kitchen. I placed it under the bright light of the countertop and read it once more, this time aloud. Joint and several liability. Full legal standing. I underlined the phrase with a red pen and stared at it. This wasn't about revenge, this was about protection. About not letting 30 years of effort go down the drain because someone else was too blind to see the danger or too arrogant to stop it. Grayson had bet on the wrong opponent. And Stella. She may have shut the door in my face today, but that door had 2 locks. One of them still belonged to me. I opened my laptop, pulled up my saved contacts, and clicked on a name I hadn't used since the day we closed on their house. Richard Chen, real estate attorney. He had walked us through the paperwork years ago, patient and clear, never rushing us. I remembered his voice. If you ever need clarification in the future, don't hesitate to reach out. I hesitated, now fingers hovering over the call button, but only for a second. Then I clicked. It was time to let the law speak for me. The next morning, I found myself parked outside a sleek glass building downtown, watching the light bounce off mirrored windows while I tried to collect my thoughts. I hadn't been here in years, since the day Stella and Grayson first sat beside me, nervous and excited, signing mortgage papers with shaky hands and big dreams. Richard Chen's office had looked just as polished back then and just as intimidating. Back then, he had smiled kindly, explained every clause, and handed us each a folder neatly labeled with our names. I remembered his voice clearly, calm and precise. If you ever have questions down the line, don't hesitate to call me. So now, years later, I was doing exactly that. I stepped into the building, nerves steady but not exactly calm. The receptionist still sat behind the curved front desk, though I wasn't sure if it was the same woman. I gave her my name, and a few minutes later, Richard came out to greet me just like he had years ago. Crisp shirt, warm, handshake eyes that missed nothing. "Claire," he said, gesturing toward his office. "It's good to see you. Though I take it this isn't just a social call." "No," I said with a small smile. "I wish it were." We stepped inside. His office overlooked the city bookshelves lined with thick binders and law books, but nothing was cluttered. Everything about Richard was neat, methodical, controlled. That's why I'd trusted him then. And why I came back now. I handed him the folder I'd brought from home. "I need your help understanding where I stand legally. This is the house I co-signed on for my daughter and her husband, and I just found out." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "I believe my son-in-law has taken out additional loans against the house. Gambling debts?" Richard raised an eyebrow but said nothing until he had flipped through a few of the documents. "These are clear," he murmured. "This one, home equity line of credit for $30,000, was initiated just last year, and this other one, $15,000, looks like a second draw." He looked up at me. "Did you consent to any of these?" I shook my head. "No. I only signed when we purchased the house originally. Nothing after. And your name is still on the deed as a co-owner." "Yes, I have copies of everything at home and it's all in the public record. That's why I'm here. I need to know if there's anything I can do before they lose the house entirely, or drag me down with them." Richard leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers together. "Well," he said after a pause, "you have more power than you think, Claire. A lot more." I sat straighter. "You're a legal co-owner, not just a guarantor. That means any major financial decision tied to the property, including home equity loans or refinancing, should have required your explicit consent. If Grayson moved forward without that, it could be challenged. But more importantly..." He turned to his computer and began typing quickly, pulling up property records and lien summaries. "Let's see what we're dealing with." For the next 15 minutes, I watched as charts and figures appeared on his screen. Original mortgage amount market appreciation, outstanding debts. Your home's current market value is approximately $460,000, give or take, he said finally. You still owe around $293 on the original mortgage, and now there's roughly $53,000 in additional liens and credit lines. I nodded slowly. "So we're still above water?" "Technically, yes. But if Grayson continues borrowing, or if they default, you could all be dragged into foreclosure. That's where your rights come in." He turned to me fully now. "As a co-owner, you can petition the court to force a sale of the property, especially if it's being mismanaged or put at risk by the other owners. It's called a partition by sale." I stared at him. "You're telling me I can legally force them to sell the house?" "Yes. It's not common in family settings, but it's absolutely legal. You'd file as a co-owner seeking equitable division of property. The court then oversees the sale and divides proceeds based on ownership percentages. It's a clean process. On paper, at least. I folded my hands in my lap. And emotionally, Richard gave a small understanding smile. Messy. It usually is when family's involved. But it's better than standing by and letting your investment, your stability, get swallowed up by someone else's recklessness. My thoughts flicked back to Stella's face the day before, red with anger and disbelief. Her voice shaking as she screamed at me to leave. The way she clutched her phone like it was a shield. "She thinks I'm trying to ruin her life," I murmured. Richard leaned forward. "What do you think you're doing?" I looked down at my hands. "I think I'm trying to save what's left of it, or at least protect what I built. Then don't let guilt stop you from doing what's right." He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a business card, scribbling something on the back. "This is Donald Kessler," he said. "Family civil attorney. Specializes in partition cases, especially those that involve sensitive family dynamics. He's smart, experienced, and he won't let things spiral. If you're serious about pursuing this, he's the one you need next." I took the card, reading the name and number. The weight of it felt heavier than the paper itself. "I'll think about it," I said, though the truth was, I already had. Richard stood with me, walking me back to the reception area. One last thing he said as we shook hands. "You're not the villain in this, Claire. You're a co-owner. You're protecting your equity and your peace of mind. If your daughter doesn't see that now, maybe she will later. But either way, this is your right." I nodded, grateful. "Thank you, Richard. For being clear. And kind. That's what law should be," he said with a smile. "Clear and kind. But firm when it needs to be." I stepped back out into the sunlight, the traffic noise and city breeze rushing to meet me. The card with Donald's name was still warm in my hand. I stood there for a moment, watching people walk by, sipping lattes and rushing toward their own meetings, unaware of the battles other people were quietly fighting. And then I walked toward my car with a steadiness I hadn't felt in days. The legal path ahead would be complicated, but it would be fair, and most importantly, it would be mine to walk. Grayson had gambled with the wrong house. Because this house, it still had my name on it, and I wasn't done protecting what I'd spent a lifetime building. Donald Kessler's law office didn't feel like the kind of place where people came to win. It felt like the place where people came when they'd run out of options. The waiting area was quiet, no soft music or cheerful receptionist. Just thick carpets, wood-paneled walls, and a faint scent of leather and dust. I sat alone, hands clasped around a folder that had grown heavier each time I carried it. Not because of its weight, but because of everything it represented. Years of sacrificed trust, and now betrayal. When the inner door opened, Donald stepped out. He was younger than I expected, mid-40s maybe, but his presence had the kind of calm authority you only earn from seeing too much. His handshake was firm, but not aggressive. His voice steady. "Mrs. Mitchell." "Come on in." His office was dimmer than Richard's had been, the blinds drawn against the glare. Shelves of legal books lined the walls, some well-worn, some pristine. A large wooden desk took up most of the space, and behind it, Donald gestured to one of the two chairs opposite him. "Let's get right into it," he said as I sat. "I've reviewed the documents Mr. Chen forwarded. Your name is on the original mortgage and deed as co-owner. That's the foundation of everything that follows." He opened a folder and slid a set of stapled pages toward me. In the state of Florida, co-owners who no longer agree on how a property should be used or maintained have the right to file for a partition. That means you can ask the court to order the sale of the house, then divide the proceeds according to ownership percentages. I nodded slowly, taking it in. And in this case, he continued, "You're not just reacting to a disagreement. You're reacting to mismanagement and potential financial harm. Your daughter's husband has taken out multiple loans against the home without your consent. That puts your share of the equity, and your credit, at risk." I didn't speak. I just nodded again. Donald leaned forward, I know this is difficult. No one walks into my office with a smile when the defendant is their own child. But let's be clear, this isn't about punishing anyone. It's about protecting yourself. You didn't sign up for this mess, and you're well within your rights to act. I took a slow breath. What happens once I file? He pulled another sheet from the folder and turned it toward me. First, we submit a petition for partition to the county court. It names you as plaintiff and your daughter and her husband as co-defendants. We include the property address, the deed mortgage details, outstanding liens, and proof of co-ownership. He tapped the page. Once it's filed, the court issues a case number. Then the clerk's office serves official notice to Stella and Grayson. That starts the 30-day response window. If they respond, we prepare for a hearing. If they don't, we request a default judgment. And in the meantime, we file a notice of lis pendens with the county. Basically, a public warning that the property is under legal dispute. That prevents them from refinancing, selling, or making major financial changes until the case is resolved. I looked down at my hands in my lap. And if they fight it, Donald nodded, then we go to court. But from what Richard told me, they've already ignored legal boundaries. That often means they'll either ignore this too or panic and lash out emotionally. But the court doesn't care about feelings. It cares about documents, signatures, and ownership. If you hold the paperwork, and you do, you hold the leverage. There was a long pause. You've done this before, I asked. Many times. Usually with siblings over inherited property. Occasionally with divorced couples. Family partition cases are the hardest. But they're also the clearest when one party is simply trying to protect what they rightfully own. I thought of Stella's face, flushed with disbelief. Her voice raised, trembling with conviction as she told me to leave. I thought of the kitchen drawer with unopened bills and the giant television glowing like a beacon of denial. I thought of Grayson's slick charm and reckless debts and the slow, sinking realization that neither of them saw the danger until it had already swallowed them whole. And I thought of the 30 years of quiet sacrifice that had led me here. Donald slid a pen across the desk. This is the petition. We can make edits, but everything's here. Once you sign, I'll submit it first thing Monday morning. The filing fee is $450. My hand hovered over the pen, not out of hesitation, but out of grief. Signing that page meant crossing a line. It meant admitting that Stella wouldn't come around, that her love, or at least her trust, had limits I could no longer reach. But I had already stood in her kitchen and watched her choose silence over truth, watched her cover her ears rather than read the facts. That choice had already been made. I picked up the pen and signed. Donald nodded. I'll walk this down to the clerk's office myself. He stood and I followed him through the quiet corridors of the building. Everything felt hushed, final, like the moment before a storm breaks. The clerk's window was just down the hall. A woman with reading glasses and a stack of manila folders looked up as we approached. Donald handed over the paperwork. Partition petition, co-ownership case. Plaintiff is Claire Mitchell. She flipped through the pages, pulled a stamp from a drawer, and pressed it hard onto the top page. The thud echoed faintly in the quiet space. Case filed. CV 2025-1187. That was it. No dramatic music, no gavel. Just one red stamp on a white page. But it felt like a gavel had dropped in my chest all the same. Donald took the stamped copy and handed it to me. You'll receive formal notice of hearing schedules by mail. I'll let you know when your daughter and son-in-law have been served. I nodded, gripping the page with both hands. Go home, he said gently. Rest. You've done the hard part. But he was wrong. The hard part wasn't the filing. It was accepting that I'd been pushed to this point by the very people I loved the most. It was knowing that the next time Stella heard from me, it would be through a court summons, not a phone call. It was learning that love could be loyal, and still not be enough to keep someone safe. As I stepped back out into the late afternoon air, I stared down at the stamped petition once more. The red letters glared up at me, but not with anger. With clarity. I hadn't started this fire. But I would no longer let it burn down what I had spent a lifetime building. The line had been crossed. Now the law would draw the next one. The summons were served on a Thursday. By Friday morning, my phone had already begun its campaign of pleading guilt and panic. It started with a call from Stella. I didn't answer. A few minutes later, she called again. Then again. Then came the first voicemail, her voice shaking, but still clinging to control. "Mom, I don't know what this is. We got some legal papers today. Grayson says it's a mistake. Can you just call me back? Please." I set my phone down without touching it. Let it ring. Let it buzz. Let her speak into silence. By noon, the messages had shifted from confusion to outrage. Grayson's number lit up my screen next. "You really went through with this?" His voice snapped in the voicemail. "This is Family Claire. Family doesn't take each other to court." Another message followed. Then another. By dinner time, there were 7 missed calls, 4 voicemails, 2 text messages. The pattern was clear. Panic first, then denial, then fury. And I answered none of them, because there was nothing left to say. Instead, I packed a suitcase, just the essentials. Some clothes, toiletries, my folders, and the original signed petition, sealed in a zippered case. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't leave a note. I simply called the apartment manager downtown, the one Richard had recommended when I first told him I might need to disappear for a while. She remembered my name, offered me a short-term lease with no questions asked. I moved into Unit 2B by sunset. The apartment was small and plain but safe. It had a coded entry, a working stove, and a window that faced east toward the courthouse. I could see the spire of the clock tower from my second-story perch, and for some reason that comforted me. I unpacked slowly. Folded my shirts into drawers that had never belonged to anyone before me, hung my coat, placed my mug and kettle by the stove. It was all so unfamiliar, so quiet, but it was a space that belonged only to me. My phone kept ringing. On Sunday morning, I turned it off completely. Grayson had called 9 times the day before. His voicemails grew darker with each one. "You're making a mistake. You'll regret this. You're ruining your own daughter's life." And then finally a thinly veiled threat. "You know things happen, people who live alone. Accidents aren't that uncommon." That one I saved. I forwarded the voicemail to Donald with a short note, "For the record, escalating tone." He replied within the hour, "We'll keep everything documented. Do not engage. I'll file a protective notice with the court on Monday." I stared at the screen after reading that. Protective notice. What a world we live in, I thought, where a mother needs legal protection from her daughter's husband. But Grayson had crossed a line long ago, and now he was grasping at control he never truly had. That evening, I went back to my house, not to stay but to retrieve a few more things. I pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment in the car watching the windows. Everything was still. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, waved gently from her porch. I nodded, then stepped inside. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. I moved through the house like a ghost, picked up a photo of Stella from her college graduation still framed on the side table. She had been smiling so wide that day, proud to be debt-free, proud of the future ahead of her. I remembered thinking I had done my job, that she was safe, that my sacrifices had found their meaning in her security. I set the photo down and turned away. I gathered a few more things. A raincoat, a notebook, a book I hadn't finished reading. Then I walked back through each room, locking the windows, adjusting the thermostat, checking the front door twice. Before I left, I placed a temporary mail hold with the post office and updated my delivery address. Let the house sit empty. Let Grayson come looking. Let him rage at the air. I wouldn't be there to absorb any of it anymore. Back at the apartment, I made tea and sat by the window as the streetlights flickered on. I could see the courthouse tower again, tall and white against the dusky sky. Every hour it chimed. Precise, predictable, unlike people. The next morning brought a knock on the door. My stomach tightened, but when I checked the peephole, it was only the building's maintenance man replacing filters. Still, I made a note to stay alert. I was taking no chances. By Wednesday, the silence was unnerving, but in a different way. My phone was on again, but no calls had come through since the weekend. Not from Stella, not from Grayson. The quiet didn't bring peace. It brought tension, as if they were holding their breath, waiting, watching, planning something unseen. Donald called to confirm the lispendens had been filed. They can't sell, refinance, or touch the property now, he said. If they attempt to do anything financially, the court will step in. We're in control. I thanked him and hung up. That night, as I sat in my new recliner by the apartment window, I thought about what it meant to be alone. Not lonely, but alone. No one knew I was here except Donald and Richard. No one had my new address. And for the first time in what felt like years, I had nothing to explain. No emotional arguments to deflect. No manipulations to untangle. Just the law, just the facts. Grayson's charm meant nothing here. His threats fell into voicemails and court records. Stella's silence could not rewrite a signature or a clause. It was all moving now quietly, steadily, like concrete setting beneath a foundation. By Thursday evening, I was watching the city lights come on one by one, a soft grid of life outside my window. In the distance, the courthouse bell struck 7. I stood and moved to the door, turning the deadbolt into place, then the secondary lock beneath it. I tested the knob twice, then stepped back. Everything was secure. I walked to the window once more and looked out over the city, my eyes finding the clock tower again. I had chosen this apartment for its view, not because it was scenic, but because it reminded me that justice didn't sleep. It didn't argue. It didn't shout or throw tantrums or make emotional messes. It simply moved forward. And now, so would I. I closed the blinds slowly, one slat at a time, until the courthouse disappeared. Then I turned off the lights and let the silence wrap around me. Not as isolation, but as clarity. Tomorrow would bring more filings, more paperwork, more precision. But tonight I rested, far away from their noise, and one step closer to peace. It had been nearly 2 weeks since I'd filed the petition. By then, the air in my apartment had settled into something that resembled normal. My routines had shifted. I no longer checked my phone with dread or stood at the window scanning for Grayson's car. I no longer waited for Stella's voice to plead through a voicemail I wouldn't answer. Whatever storm they were brewing, it hadn't reached me. And that in itself was a sign. Silence wasn't always peace. Sometimes silence was strategy. Sometimes it meant they were choosing to pretend none of this was real. That the lawsuit, the court, the legal filings, none of it could actually touch them if they just ignored it long enough. But the court didn't work that way. The clock didn't stop ticking because someone refused to hear it. On a quiet Wednesday morning, I met Richard again, this time in a neutral conference room just off his office. He was already seated when I arrived, laptop open, papers arranged in a precise fan on the table. He greeted me with a nod and a smile that looked both professional and personal. "Morning, Claire. Let's walk through what we're looking at." He spun the laptop around gently so I could see the market analysis on the screen. "This is your daughter's property." "Well, your property too. Based on comps in the neighborhood and the condition of the house, we're looking at a market value of approximately $425,000. "That's lower than I expected," I admitted. "It's a little under market," he nodded. "But partition sales are rarely full market transactions. Buyers know there's a court-ordered timeline and emotional stress involved. It pushes the price down a bit." I nodded, letting the number settle in. $425,000. I did some math in my head. Minus the remaining mortgage, minus Grayson's debt, minus legal fees and realtor commissions. The number that remained wasn't huge, but it was real. Tangible. A reminder that I wasn't walking away from this empty-handed. Given the outstanding balance on the mortgage and the secondary liens, Richard continued, "You're still looking at approximately $70,000 to $80,000 in net proceeds. That's a conservative estimate. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. But money had a way of standing in for respect when respect was long gone. I leaned back in my chair. Has either of them responded yet? To the summons. Richard shook his head. Not a word. No court filing. No lawyer appearances. They're either being advised not to respond or they think it'll just disappear. They're waiting for me to back down, I said softly. He glanced at me. And are you? I met his eyes. No. He gave a small, satisfied smile. Then let's keep moving forward. We discussed timeline steps. The court had already accepted the partition petition. The next move was getting the home appraised by a court-certified evaluator. Once the appraisal was complete, the property could be listed for sale under court supervision. If they still don't respond, Richard said, we'll proceed with default judgment. The court will assume they've waived their right to dispute. And then I asked, we go to sale. No need for their approval. It's in the court's hands at that point. I took that in slowly. Every step felt so formal, so cold, so unlike the warmth I'd once imagined would define my later years with my daughter. I had pictured us sharing weekends, holidays, small everyday joys. Not court filings and deadlines, but those small joys had already been taken. Not by me, but by their choices. Their silence. Their arrogance. They were betting that I wouldn't follow through. But they had forgotten I was the one who had paid every bill on time, who had read every contract word for word, who had fixed leaky roofs and balanced grocery money down to the last cent. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness, and they had misunderstood just how far I was willing to go, not for revenge but for truth, for closure, for peace. I signed the documents Richard handed me. He slid them back into his folder, eyes scanning the lines with practiced care. The appraiser will reach out to schedule an evaluation within the week, he said. Court requires documentation before listing. After that, we can proceed. Will they be notified? Yes. They'll get another copy of the appraisal and listing notice. But again, no response required from them at this stage. I nodded. We stood to leave. He offered his hand firm and steady. You're doing the right thing, Claire. I gave a quiet smile. It doesn't feel right. It just feels necessary. That's often the difference between justice and vengeance, he said. Justice doesn't always feel good, but it holds. When I returned to the apartment, the light had shifted through the window. The courthouse tower still stood tall in the distance, its shadow stretching across the buildings. I brewed myself a cup of tea and sat at the table, letting the warmth move through my fingers. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't sad, but because sadness had long ago turned into resolve. I had spent years putting Stella first. Her schooling, her wedding, her home. I had stood behind her while she walked into a future I had helped pave. And somewhere along the way she stopped looking back. It wasn't my job to fix her choices anymore, but it was my right to protect my own. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, my phone buzzed with a message. From Richard. Appraisal complete. Court submission filed. Just 5 words. But to me, it sounded like something else entirely. It sounded like momentum. Like truth. Like something that was finally moving without me having to push it. I looked out the window one more time past the courthouse tower and into the stretch of sky beyond it. And I whispered to myself, not with bitterness, but with clarity. They've chosen their silence. I've chosen mine. Let the court speak next. It started with a man holding a clipboard. He arrived at the house on a Monday afternoon wearing khakis and a navy windbreaker. Stella had just returned from the grocery store. Grayson was on a call in the living room, pacing as usual, talking too loud. The man introduced himself briefly, then began walking the perimeter of the property, snapping photos from every angle. He didn't look at her with anger or pity, just professionalism, clinical distance, court-ordered appraisal. He said plainly, then continued working. Neighbors noticed. A woman from 2 doors down paused while watering her plants. A retired couple across the street leaned a little closer to their front window. The man didn't wave or smile. He just kept working as if this house, this street, this family were just another name on a spreadsheet. By evening, the questions had started. Everything okay, Stella? We saw a man taking pictures of your place. Are you remodeling? Is the house going on the market? Grayson deflected with awkward chuckles, muttering something about refinancing or insurance. But the lies didn't stick. Not when one of the neighbors said she saw a printed page on the clipboard labeled Partition Sale, CV 2025-187. The panic set in quickly. That night they called again, 6 times, left voicemails. Stella's voice was frantic, apologetic pleading. Grayson's tone veered between rage and desperation. I listened to none of them. By Tuesday, the photos of the home had been uploaded into a file attached to the court's public record. Richard forwarded the link to me along with the updated market report. Next step, formal listing, he wrote. That night, Stella showed up at my old house. Mrs. Patterson saw her pacing the porch, knocking softly at first, then louder. She sat for a while on the front step, her knees drawn up, face buried in her hands. At some point, she reached into her bag, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and slid it beneath the doorframe. Then she left. Mrs. Patterson called me afterward, voice low and hesitant. I didn't speak to her. Just watched. Thought you should know. I thanked her, then made the drive across town to retrieve the note. The house still smelled like dust and lemon polish. I hadn't been back in nearly a month. I unlocked the door slowly, stepping inside with careful steps, as if the past might still be standing in the hallway. The note was just inside the door, face down on the hardwood. I picked it up, unfolded it gently. It was written in Stella's handwriting. Neat, rounded letters, the same script she used when she used to label her school folders. Mom, I know you're angry. I know you're hurt. I don't know what to say except, I'm sorry. I didn't know what Grayson was doing. I didn't see it. Maybe I didn't want to. I just wanted things to feel normal, and now they're not. Now everything is falling apart. We're going to lose the house. We can't get another loan. His credit is destroyed. Mine isn't much better. We can't even pay the utilities next month. Please, Mom, I'm asking you as your daughter. Please don't go through with the sale. Give us time. We'll fix it. We'll figure it out. Please. Love, Stella. I stood there holding that note in both hands. I didn't cry. There was a time not so long ago when that letter would have broken me, when the word Mom alone would have been enough to make me pick up the phone, drive across town, and fix everything myself. But that time was gone, because this letter didn't arrive when the gambling began. It didn't arrive when the first debt was taken out or when my name was dragged through online loan applications without my knowledge. It didn't arrive when I stood in her kitchen offering her the truth only to be thrown out and threatened with police. This letter came after the process had already started, after the appraisal, after the photos, after the legal machine had been put in motion, and most of all it came only after the neighbors noticed. I folded the note quietly without tearing it, without scribbling a response. Then I walked into my old home office, opened the filing cabinet that still held the case folder, and slipped the note inside. It rested between the certified copy of the court petition and the market appraisal. Another document, another layer of proof. Not of wrongdoing, but of timing, of perspective. They hadn't wanted to fix anything. They just didn't want to be seen falling apart. Back at the apartment, the view from my window looked unchanged. The courthouse tower stood steady in the distance. The streetlights flickered on one by one. I set my keys down, poured myself a glass of water, and sat in the silence that had become my companion. I didn't feel cold. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt done. Because when the legal process begins, emotions no longer matter. Pleas and apologies don't undo filings. Tears don't unstamp court documents. A letter slid under the door doesn't erase the day you chose to slam it in someone's face. They thought they were being pushed out by me, but the truth was they had already stepped out themselves, when they turned away, when they lied, when they chose silence over truth. I looked out across the city lights stretching far beyond what I could name, and I said it quietly only to myself. When the law begins to move, emotion is no longer an argument. It's just background noise. The "for sale" sign went up quietly on a Tuesday morning. I didn't see it happen in person, but Richard sent me a photo. The post was sturdy, the lettering clean, court-ordered sale. Motivated seller. A rider hung just beneath it. Cash offers only. The house looked strangely bare in the photo, even though I knew it was still full of furniture and memories. Somehow seeing that sign planted in the front yard, just above the flower bed I'd helped Stella build with her own hands, was more final than any court document. By the end of the week, we had 3 offers, all cash, all aggressive. The market had softened a little since the initial appraisal, but that didn't stop the investors from circling. Partition sales had a reputation for urgency, and urgency meant leverage. They knew we couldn't wait, that we wouldn't haggle, and so within 6 days of listing, Richard called to say the house had gone under contract. 15-day closing, he said. No contingencies. Buyers already submitted proof of funds. I closed my eyes, absorbing it. You'll net just over $78,000, he added. That's after paying off the remaining mortgage balance, settling the liens, and covering legal and agent fees. It was a strange number. Not a fortune. Not even what the house might have fetched under normal circumstances. But it was real. It was clean. And it was mine. Richard followed up with a formal message later that afternoon. Short, precise. Closing date March 28th. Vacate by March 25th. The next morning my phone buzzed again. Stella. She had called 7 times the day before. I hadn't answered any of them. But this time I let the voicemail play out on speaker just to hear what story she would tell now. Her voice was smaller than before, softer. Mom, we found an apartment. It's not great, but it's something. The thing is, we need help with the deposit. First month, last month, and security. Grayson can't get approved for anything, and they're asking for cash up front. There was a pause. Her voice wavered. I know you're mad. I know you're done. But please, if there's any way you can help. I'm not asking for a handout. We just need to land on our feet. Please call me back. I deleted the message without saving it. I didn't do it out of anger or revenge. I did it because I had spent my whole life helping Stella land safely, and every time it had cost me something I never got back. She hadn't called me when the debts started. She hadn't called when Grayson emptied their savings or leveraged our house to fund his addiction. She hadn't called when I brought her proof and begged her to listen. She had called the police. And now when the safety net was gone and the floor beneath them had finally cracked, now she remembered how to say Mom. But it was no longer my job to catch her. I looked out the apartment window. The courthouse clock was visible through the haze, still marking time as precisely as ever. I remembered once explaining to Stella how compound interest worked, how paying a little extra every month on the mortgage would shorten the loan term by years. Time matters, I told her back then. You don't feel it right away, but it adds up. I hadn't realized that applied to trust, too. Every overlooked lie, every excuse, every time she'd brushed off my concern, it all added up. Until one day the balance came due. Later that afternoon, Donald called to confirm the buyer had completed their walkthrough and the paperwork was in final review. Nothing would stop the sale now. All that was left was for Stella and Grayson to vacate the property. They haven't filed any delays, he said. No response, no appeals. They're letting it happen. I know I said, because they think I'll cave. Donald was quiet for a moment. Then, will you know? I said simply, not this time. After we hung up, I went to the kitchen and made a pot of tea. I sipped it slowly, savoring the quiet. There had been so much noise before. Voices, yelling voicemails, pleading panic behind every message. Now there was only the steady hum of what was already decided. I pulled out the original loan documents again, reading the clause that started it all joint and several liability. I traced the signatures, mine and Stella's, side by side. She had asked me to trust her then. And I had. But the truth is, trust isn't a one-time gift. It has to be honored, maintained, reaffirmed through action, not apology. The house sale wasn't a punishment. It was a consequence, and consequences, I had learned, don't wait for permission to arrive. That evening I received one last message. It was a text from Stella. Closing is in 2 weeks. I guess this is really happening. I don't know what else to say. I didn't respond. What was there to say? She had made her choices, and I had made mine. I wasn't shutting her out. I was stepping out of a pattern that had drained me for years. The money would never make up for what was lost, but it would give me something I hadn't had in a very long time, a clean start. That night I folded away the final paperwork and placed it into the file labeled Partition, Final. I slipped the envelope into my drawer, then turned off the lights. Outside, the street was quiet. No calls, no knocks at the door, just stillness and the steady rhythm of justice marching forward. I checked my phone one last time before bed. A message from Richard had just come through. Closing date confirmed March 28th. Vacate by March 25th. I read it twice. Then I locked my door and let myself rest. The voicemail came on a rainy Thursday morning. The sky was heavy, the kind of gray that seeped into your bones and made the coffee taste a little more necessary. I was standing at the kitchen window of my apartment watching droplets race each other down the glass when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was from Stella. I didn't pick it up. I didn't rush to see what she had to say. I simply waited until the quiet returned, until the silence reclaimed the space her voice used to fill. Then I pressed play. "Hi, Mom." The first 2 words were almost a whisper. Not hesitant, but fragile. A child's voice in a grown woman's mouth. "I know you're not going to call back. I don't blame you. I wouldn't either if I were you." There was a pause and then the sound of her drawing in a breath. "I just wanted you to know that. I see it now. Everything. What you were trying to do. What you were trying to protect. I didn't listen. I didn't believe you, and I'm sorry." Another pause. This one longer. "Grayson, he's in treatment now. A residential program, finally. He admitted he has a problem. Said he's been gambling since before we got married." I had no idea. I didn't want to see it. I think part of me knew, but I just kept pretending it wasn't real. My fingers curled slightly around the edge of the counter. "We're moving into a rental next week. A small place outside town. I had to borrow from a friend for the deposit. I know how ironic that is, asking someone else for help after everything I did to you." Her voice cracked. "I'm not asking for anything, Mom. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For not trusting you. For not protecting what you gave me. For choosing someone else's version of the truth instead of yours." There was one final pause, longer than the others. "I hope one day you can forgive me. Even if you don't call me back. I love you." The voicemail ended, and the silence felt deeper than before. I didn't cry. I didn't feel vindicated or angry or moved to reach for the phone. I just stood there letting her words settle the way dust does after a long overdue cleaning. She had said the words I once longed to hear. She had offered the apology that might have changed everything if it had come months earlier. Before the court dates, before the petitions, before the photo of the for sale sign in front of what used to be our shared dream. But now I had built a different kind of peace. That afternoon, I drove to a community I had visited once before on a whim. A quiet retirement development just outside the city, tucked between a small nature preserve and a walking trail. Nothing fancy. No high-rise buildings or sparkling amenities. Just low stone buildings, warm tones, well-kept paths, and the sound of wind moving through trees instead of traffic. The sales agent, a woman named Lila, met me at the front entrance. She greeted me with a knowing smile, the kind people wear when they understand your story without needing the details. I have something I think you'll like, she said, guiding me down a winding stone path toward one of the corner units. It's got a little garden view, she added, and it gets the best light in the morning. She wasn't wrong. When we stepped inside, sunlight filtered in through wide windows, falling across the floor in soft patches. The air smelled faintly of cedar. It was simple, quiet, and full of the kind of emptiness that invites a fresh start. I walked from room to room, running my fingers along the walls, taking in the view, the air, the silence. There was no sign of anyone else's taste here, no reminders of someone else's preferences. Just space. Space for me. Lila waited patiently by the kitchen island as I returned to the front room. I think this is the one I said. Her smile widened. Would you like to put down a deposit? I nodded. She handed me the paperwork and I signed where she indicated. A few simple strokes of the pen. Nothing dramatic. No fanfare. Just quiet certainty. When we finished, she stepped away to make copies. I remained by the window watching the light shift, slightly golden and gentle now. I thought about all the things I had let go of over the past few months. The grief, the anger, the guilt. The expectation that one day Stella would turn around and see me fully again, as the woman who raised her, not the obstacle she chose to push aside. And I thought about all the things I was making room for now. Peace, purpose, quiet mornings with no unanswered calls, long walks without tension curled between my shoulders, a place where no one could show up uninvited and unravel me. When Lila returned, she placed the copy of the signed agreement in a folder and handed it to me with both hands. Congratulations, Claire. I smiled. It wasn't wide, but it was real. Thank you. I stepped outside into the late afternoon sun, which was beginning to dip below the rooftops. The light spilled across the garden path, catching the leaves of the small trees that lined the sidewalk. I took a long breath in. It smelled of lavender and soil. Something alive. Something beginning. I had spent decades building a life around other people's needs. I had given my time, my money, my energy, without resentment, but also without boundaries. Now I was learning what it meant to build something just for myself. It didn't mean I didn't love Stella. It didn't mean I would never speak to her again, but it meant that forgiveness didn't always require reunion. Sometimes it just required release. I walked back to my car slowly, letting the sunlight warm my shoulders. In my hand was the deposit receipt, and in my chest was something that felt like permission. Permission to stop waiting. Permission to stop saving people who didn't want to be saved. Permission to live in peace. As I buckled my seatbelt and glanced back at the unit one last time, the light through the window caught my eye again, soft and golden. It felt like the beginning of something. Not a second chapter. Not a rebound, just a life, quiet, whole, mine. And for the first time in a very long time, I whispered to myself, not in bitterness, not in grief, but in deep, grounded certainty, I have chosen peace. The morning of the closing was still and cold, the kind of quiet you feel in your bones before the sun has fully decided to rise. I got up early even though I didn't need much time. Everything had been prepared the night before. Documents ID, the outfit I'd chosen carefully, a navy suit I hadn't worn since Stella's wedding, and the silver earrings she gave me for Mother's Day a decade ago. It wasn't for them. I didn't dress to make a point. I dressed because some moments deserve respect, and this was one of them. By the time I arrived at the downtown law office, the sky had turned pale blue. The parking garage was mostly empty. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, and the receptionist gave me a warm nod as she pointed toward the conference room. Donald was already there reviewing the documents at the long table. He looked up and smiled when I entered. Right on time, he said. Always, I replied, settling into the chair beside him. Across the table sat the buyer's attorney and a bank representative. We exchanged brief pleasantries. Nothing more. There was no need to talk about the why. The only thing that mattered now was the what. The closing packet was thick, a familiar stack of paper that documented the beginning and now the end. Donald turned the pages, slowly guiding me through each signature, each line where my initials were needed. The rhythm was steady, like crossing a bridge plank by plank without looking down. No one mentioned Stella. No one asked about the other owners. It was all business now. About halfway through, Donald slid a page toward me. "Final disbursement statement," he said. "After all deductions, your portion is $78, $437. The wire will be processed within the hour." I looked down at the number. It didn't feel triumphant. It didn't feel like a reward. It felt like something solid, something earned. Not because I'd won, but because I had endured. I signed the last page and placed the pen down with a quiet exhale. That was it. We shook hands. The attorneys packed up their files. The banker handed me a confirmation sheet and a card in case I had questions. Donald and I stepped outside together into the crisp morning air. "It's done," he said. I nodded. "Yes, it is." He looked at me carefully. "You held your ground. Not many people would have made it through this without breaking." "I broke," I said quietly. "Just not where anyone could see." He gave a small smile and offered his hand again. "You're free to move on now." And I was. Back at my new condo, I changed into a soft sweater, brewed a fresh pot of coffee, and opened the sliding door to the small patio that overlooked the garden. The sun was higher now, lighting the leaves with a golden warmth that made the air smell sweet, like something beginning again. I sat at the patio table with my coffee in hand and let myself remember. Stella had been 7 the first time she asked me why I always paid more than the mortgage bill required. I was sitting at the kitchen table, checkbook in one hand, her school lunch packed and ready in the other. "Why do you pay extra?" "Mom," she asked, standing beside me in her pajamas. "Because I said tapping the paper gently, if we pay a little more now, we'll own it sooner. And we'll pay less overall." She frowned, thoughtful. "So we get to keep it faster." "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "It'll really be ours." She'd nodded solemnly as though she understood interest rates and amortization schedules. Maybe she didn't, but she understood the heart of it. I wanted to give her something lasting, something safe. And today I realized I finally had the answer I never said out loud back then. I paid extra. I sacrificed. I worked late and skipped vacations and made careful choices, not because I needed to, but because I thought she would value it. Because I believed she would protect it, because I thought she would carry it forward. That's the lie we parents sometimes tell ourselves, that love and sacrifice guarantee understanding. They don't. Grayson and Stella had moved out 2 days earlier, according to Richard. No drama, no confrontation, just an email from their attorney confirming their compliance and a forwarding address somewhere in the outskirts of town. They had taken the furniture, the electronics, the framed photos from the hallway, but the house they left behind was hollow, stripped not just of belongings but of certainty. Their credit was in shambles, their future shaky at best. I didn't celebrate that. But I didn't grieve it either. They would learn the way I had, through consequence. Through the kind of clarity that doesn't come from lectures or warnings, but from hitting the wall and realizing you've run out of soft landings. I finished my coffee slowly. The wind rustled through the shrubs, and a robin landed on the edge of the patio fence, tilting its head toward me like it had a question. What now? Now, I rest. Now I read books without checking my phone every 10 minutes. Now I take long walks and forget what day it is. Now I live in a space where I am not a backup plan or a bank account or the invisible glue holding a family together. I am just a woman, whole and tired and healing. I stepped back inside and opened the drawer where I'd placed the closing packet. I tucked it behind the folder of court records behind the appraisal, and the lis pendens, and every notarized page that had brought me to this point. Then I closed the drawer, not to forget, but to mark the ending. Because this wasn't revenge. This wasn't punishment. It was resolution. It was the law doing what family refused to do, acknowledge the truth, and respond accordingly. It was protection. It was clarity. It was justice. And justice, I had learned, doesn't need an apology. It only needs the truth and a name on the record. Have you ever been in a situation where standing your ground felt like losing everything? Only to realize it was the beginning of getting your peace back. Claire's story isn't about revenge. It's about boundaries, about what happens when love is pushed too far and quiet strength becomes the only path forward. If you've ever been dismissed, taken for granted, or forced to choose between family and self-respect, you're not alone. What would you have done in Claire's place? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read everyone. And if this story spoke to you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next story that just might reflect your own